Welcome to SolFul Connections, where we skip the small talk and head right into the soul talk. I'm Amanda Solar, and each week we share the kinds of stories that remind us we're not alone. It's about being human, raw and unfiltered, just real talk. Let's connect.
Connection.
In this episode of the Soulful Connections podcast, I interview former Congressman James Greenwood, who has spent decades in the limelight. He has been in politics for years and years, and today is still active in politics, even though he is not holding public office. He is outspoken in a world that often punishes people who are outspoken. And this made me really want to talk with him about how to get the courage to do that. What does that feel like? And I wanted to know all about his journey to, in, and beyond politics. So, welcome to a very special episode. So, today on Soulful Connections, I have the privilege of being with former Congressman James Greenwood, who spent decades in public service, first in the Pennsylvania State Legislature, then in the U.S. House of Representatives. In a world where authenticity and courage, especially in the political arena, seems somewhat extinct, he's kind of a rare bird. And by the way, I intentionally use the word bird.
I was waiting for that.
Because what I also want to explore is Jim's passion for birds and bird photography. So today I just want to talk about all of it. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm delighted to. Thanks for the invitation.
And let's actually start off with birds.
Sure.
There.
Why not?
So were you always interested? I mean, even when you were a child, like when did this start?
Well, I spent a lot of time outdoors as a kid. But actually when I graduated from college, I was pretty much of a hippie, and it was 1973, and I had the idea that I wanted to live in a natural setting for free. So I went to the Bucks County Parks Department and asked if they had any houses that needed caretakers. And they said, well, not exactly, but in Silver Lake Park, which is in Lower Bucks County, we have a nature center, and we're having trouble with vandalism. And how would you like to live there? It's just an A-frame attic in an attic.
Wow.
I said, sure, I'll do that. And they said, well, how would you also like to be the weekend park ranger? I said, cool, I'll do that. And I wound up with green pants and a green shirt and a pith helmet and a badge, and walked around the park all day. And in the winter, I had to put on ice skates and wobbly skate around trying to break up hockey fights on the lake. Anyway, then they said, well, how would you also like to be the part-time naturalist here? And I said, well, I'd be delighted to do that. They said, well, we're looking for someone who really knows their birds and their wildflowers and their trees. And I looked them right in the face and said, I know all that stuff, which was not exactly true. They said, all right, that was a Friday. They said, come back Monday morning and meet the boss. So I went straight to the bookstore and got some field guides and went out and started studying birds and wildflowers and trees and so forth. So I came in for my interview Monday, and I said, oh boy, by the way, I just saw a pileated woodpecker on a red maple out there. It's the one that's surrounded by such and such wildflowers. And so that's how I got into it.
Okay.
And so I ended up doing a lot of building boardwalks through the woods at the park and taking people on birding tours. And then I got involved with the annual Audubon Christmas bird count. And so I've been doing that for 50 some years. And it was on the board of the National Audubon Society. And then in the meantime, maybe about 15 years ago, I got into bird photography. And that I became really quite passionate about that. And so I photograph birds all over the world. And I just came back from a trip to Santiago, Chile, and Patagonia, and the Falkland Islands, photographing lots of kinds of birds, including penguins, but also pumas and sea lions and all kinds of fun stuff.
That is really unusual, Jim, I have to say. Because what I'm thinking as you're talking is, what kind of a kid were you? Most of us really kind of look around, see what other people are doing, and do that.
Mhm.
And where did you get the temerity to explore this unusual avenue? Like, where did that come from?
Um, I don't know really all that well. My best friend's father was into birding, and he took us out sometime when I was doing my college years. But um, I would say that in the days when I grew up, parents were less overly conscious about safety. Now they don't
Yeah.
want. I'm reading a book called The Anxious Generation, and it's about to some measure, it's fundamentally about why people spend the damage of young people spending so much time with their iPhones. But it also talks about the fact that the parents now are very protective of their children and don't let them go, out unaccompanied, so to speak. When we were kids, we get up in the morning and we were young and we just went, out in the woods and hiked miles and, but parents didn't know where we were. We were climbing trees and risking our necks and that kind of thing.
Yes.
So maybe that has something to do with it.
Yeah, that's it. I kind of forget that because I'm both. I was the kid who was sent out to the park and came home, by dinner time. And also I'm a parent of doing the same type of thing that, the author of The Anxious Generation is cautioning not to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being, overly protective, I'm sure. And
Hmm.
so,
Yeah, and it's a hard line to draw. It's
yeah,
natural for everybody to want to protect their children, but there's something to be said for the children have to have some amount of risks in their lives to gain confidence. If they're coddled and helicopter parented, they don't necessarily have the opportunity to take risks and fail and fall and get up and know that they can do that throughout their life when with tougher challenges.
yeah. So can you go back and share a little bit about, how you ended up, I guess, from being a park ranger to, you know, your, I guess, ultimately being a congressman.
Yeah.
What is
Well,
it like?
um, I mentioned that I graduated from college. It was Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, in 1973. Those years, 1969 and 73, were pretty tumultuous. You had the Vietnam War going on. You had First Earth Day because of concerns about the UN. And so I did a couple of things after my park service days. I had fallen in love with a young lady when I was a senior in college in a political science class, and it turned out that her dad was a state representative. His name was Jack Renninger, and eventually she dumped me, but he didn't. And he so from 9 to 2 every day, Monday through Friday, I worked in his home office as a constituent service representative, and then from 3 to 11 every night, I worked at the wood schools as a house parent with children who were either intellectually disabled and children with emotional mental health issues. And so I was doing that, and that was like in 1974, 5. And then Jack Renninger decided to run for Congress in 1976, and he asked me if I would be his campaign manager. So I left my job at the Wood Schools and I went to Washington to the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee, learned how to be a campaign manager, came back, managed the campaign against a guy by the name of Peter Kostmeyer. We lost. It was a bad year for Republicans because it was the first congressional election post Watergate. And so and we also had a third party right wing guy who got 3% of the vote, about it basically out of our hide. So we got 47. Kosmara got 48. The other guy got 49. So we lost. So then since I had met some political people, of course, in the process, I went to the county commissioners and got a job at the Bucks County Children and Youth Social Service Agency, working with abused and neglected children. And because of my background at the Wood Schools, it was particularly with abused and neglected children who had those kinds of disabilities as well. So I did that for a few years, and then when Jack Renninger lost the race for the state house, for Congress in '76, his seat in the state house was taken by a woman whose name was Margaret George, a Democrat, and then she was reelected in '78. So in late '79, Jack Renninger called me at my office, Children and Youth office, and asked, "Why don't you run for my old office, my old seat?" And I said, "Well, because I'd have to cut my hair and I'd have to buy a suit and I'd have to be nice to a lot of people I don't really want to be nice to." And I said, "Plus, I'm helping these kids." And he said, "Well, don't you think you could be more helpful to these children if you were in the legislature?" And that struck a chord. And the other thing that went into my decision to actually go ahead and do it was I had become a Republican committee man in the course of the campaign in Pleasant, Pennsylvania. And one of the things that the committee people do is local, state, municipal, federal. And these candidates would come before us, and I would just shake my head and go, is this the best we can do here? This is Bucks County. And it occurred to me that the salaries were so low and the workload was so high and the exposure was so great that most people didn't want to, do that. And I thought, well, if I think that the qualified people should run, I wasn't necessarily qualified, but people who think they could do the job better, I should, put up or shut up. So I quit my job at the agency and started door knocking in early February, and just door knocked and campaigned all the way through to election day. And it's a good thing I did, because we won by like 360 votes or something like that. So that's how it started. And then when I got there, I formed the Legislative Children's Caucus and worked at a lot of children's issues.
So when you were little, when you were growing up and you were thinking like, this is what I'm going to be when I grow up, were you ever thinking about politics?
No, not really. My father was very active civically. He was elected to the Northampton Township Board of Supervisors. He was the chief of the fire company. He headed the rescue squad. He was the businessman of the year and that kind of thing. So there was a lot of talk about civic service and civil service, so to speak. And so that was there. But initially, I wanted to be a lawyer and go to law school. But by the time in those tumultuous years of '69 to '73, I just didn't feel like going to law school, and I never really was one of those people who thought, I want to be an elected official. I would have been happy to be staff. If we had won the congressional race for Renninger, I would have been happy to try to be his chief of staff. But I didn't really look forward to the being in the center of the arena myself. I didn't want to do that. So I was scared to death. The first time I had to speak in a primary election, I had a primary opponent. It was at a little basement with a Newtown area Republican club, and there may be a total of 20 people there or something. And after our little debate, this older committee man came up to me and he said, "Young man, I think you're going to go somewhere in politics if you can ever get them knees to stop knocking." I was that frightened. People, public speaking is, for most people, a very fearful thing. People say they fear it more than death. It's a very self-conscious experience. So it took a long time for me to get into that. But the fact that I was a reluctant candidate, I think gave me the feeling that throughout my 24 years in elective office, that my identity was not tied to holding office. Mm-hmm. And I've always said that there are two kinds of people that end up being elected to office. There are people who want to do public service, and there are people who are trying to resolve an identity crisis. And the latter are dangerous because they know that if they no longer have that title in front of their name, they don't know who they are. And so they will lie, cheat, and steal, vote in
Yeah.
ways that they don't think are right, do anything they can to hold on to the job. And I always felt I'm going to try to keep the job. I try to win the elections, but if I lose an election, I'm not at all worried about who I am or what I can do next. So
Yeah.
it gave me an advantage, I think, and it enabled me to cast a lot of votes that were very difficult politically, because I said, if I lose my seat over this, I'd much rather lose my seat over my votes than lose my soul over my votes. So.
So that's interesting too, because how would you characterize your time holding office?
Hmm. Um, so I first off, I never started with a great ideological position. I was very pragmatic and just, what's good for my constituents in the state and the country. And part of the thing that directed my path was that because I had been a caseworker, I was put on the health and welfare committees, both in the House, the State House, and the State Senate, and ultimately in Congress. And so a lot of the work that I did was related to those kinds of issues, health issues, as well as child welfare issues and that kind of thing. The kind of things that I'm very proud of is one of them was I passed legislation to create the Pennsylvania trauma systems. And what that meant is there was one morning I picked up my newspaper when I was in the State House, and I read about a woman who had been killed had a terrible accident in Wrightstown, Bucks County, and she died being flown to a trauma center that was up in Allentown. And I wondered why couldn't they just take her to Doylestown or take her to Newtown? And so I clipped that out, and I went to Harrisburg to my office and started talking to staff, and they said, well, it's because we don't have designated trauma systems here. And what does that mean? Well, it means that some hospitals should be exclusively prepared to be trauma centers to meet this multi-organ, multi-system trauma, because it can't all be. And but the hospitals are very afraid of that because they don't want to lose, they don't want to be one of the non-designated ones. So I worked with the Hospital Association, the Pennsylvania Medical Society, the Nurses Society, and developed legislation. We created that system of designated trauma centers,
Wow.
and that has probably saved, an uncountable number of lives across the state. So that's, the kind of thing you can do that you feel pretty darn good about having
Yeah.
accomplished.
Yeah. So you talk about, hard, difficult votes that you cast. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to live in the midst of political pressure? Which did you feel it, even though you didn't tie your identity to that role?
Mm-hmm.
Still, there is an amount of pressure that comes with being in the role that you had.
Yeah.
What was your relationship with that like?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is people think when they think about, the pressure that's on members, elected officials, particularly in legislative bodies, and they think of, is it coming from from the special interest groups? Is it coming directly from the voters? The biggest pressure comes from your peers, because especially, I mean, when I was elected to the House, my defeating a Democrat switched the Pennsylvania House from 101 Republicans and 102 Democrats to 102 Republicans and 101 Democrats. So it was a one vote difference, right?
Yeah.
And so when a vote would come up, you'd go to your caucus rooms and the leaderships would, we need everybody's vote. Everybody has to be with us on these votes. And it was the same in the state Senate. It was the same in Congress. And that is immense pressure. It's immense pressure. It's peer pressure, and it's, are you on the team or you're not on the team? And so that's very tough. But again, because of the approach that I took, I really never hesitated to I would make my case. I'd say, this is where I am. I'm happy to listen to you, but if you don't convince me, I'm going to vote the way I think I should vote. And And again, these jobs are difficult. People think that they're glamorous, and there's certainly some nice things about them, but they're extremely difficult, and you sacrifice a lot. You're away from your family a lot, and it's not worth it if you can't, at the end of your experience, say, I did it, I saw it, played it the way I saw it. I did what I thought was right. I can't imagine having to leave office and go, God, I cast so many votes that I know I shouldn't have. It's not worth it.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like you have your own internal, uh, kind of compass, basically, that
Yeah,
kind of directs
sure.
you.
Yeah.
Um, and speaking just a little bit about that pressure, I don't know if it's true. It feels like we are in a more divided time than any time I've lived through. I mean, I don't know that it's the most divided time our country has ever lived in, but it feels really divided right now. And people are really angry. And how do you feel and how do you navigate when to speak up about something, when to stay silent about something? Like, what is that process like for you?
Hmm. Well, we are more divided than we have been since the Civil War. And there are lots of reasons for that. Some of them are cultural, some of them are the results of economic pressures, but a very large part of it has to do with media. The fact that starting with the cable networks, that they understand that television is all about selling ads. And so the way you sell ads is you attract the largest audience you can. That's how you price your ads. The more eyeballs you have on your show, the higher you can charge for ads. And so you have Fox that knows there's a certain demographic that to whom it wishes to appeal, and people who are on that side of the political spectrum, they like to watch that because it confirms their bias. They don't have to feel ambiguous about the issues. That's right. Yeah, and the same thing on the other side, like MSNBC. And so we now live in parallel factual universes where people actually, if you watch Fox all day long, you think that climate change is a hoax. If you watch NBC or CNN, you believe that climate change is a dire threat to the planet, and I agree with that. And then then you expand that out to the internet where you've got people doing the same kind of thing, and so we become tribal, and our political party and our positions are no longer just that I believe this, you believe that. It's the Republicans want to own the libs and vice versa, I suppose, to some extent. But it's toxic now, and it's almost unfixable. And I don't think there's any way you're going to fix that until we have a really charismatic president who can try to bring people together. And certainly, Donald Trump has never done that. And as far as I go, if you're asking me how I managed that in my post-political time,
Yeah.
I when I left Congress, I left, as I like to say, undefeated and unindicted, to become the president and CEO of a thing called the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, which was a trade association for about 1,100 biopharmaceutical companies. And so I couldn't be overtly political during that period of time. But when I left, and I supported every Republican candidate for president from Richard Nixon through Romney, but I saw Trump as absolutely unfit for public office. To me, there's no question about that. He's a malignant narcissist, and so I felt obligated to speak out, and I have consistently. I raised $2 million for Joe Biden when he first ran. I co-chair Pennsylvania Republicans for Kamala Harris, and people, you were a traitor to your party, you're a rhino. There are plenty of Republicans I could have supported as a presidential candidate. I like John Kasich, for instance. I supported him in the primary, but for the sake of my children and my grandchildren, I feel obligated to speak out, and I'm just terribly, terribly worried about where this country is right now. And I have some. I still do some consulting, and I've lost a lot of money over it because people say, "Well, we can't hire you anymore because you've been so against Trump, and now he's in, the Republicans are in. So I don't care about that. I got to do what you got to do.
Yeah. So, Jim, what is a Republican to you?
Ah, well, I said I was never particularly ideological, and of course I probably started out as a Republican because my parents were registered Republican, and the manager I worked for was Republican, and I worked hard to keep Republicans in the majorities in the state legislature and in Congress. But to me, the basics of it were always that I believe societies work best when individuals have maximum freedom and maximum accountability. And to me, that means free enterprise is good within limits. We're seeing some of the failures of limitations on that right now. But I believe in free enterprise. I believe in prudent expenditures. I don't like confiscatory taxation. I don't think people should be punished because they make more money than their neighbor does. I think that, I'm not against some levels of progressive taxation, but and of course, to me, individual freedom also is very involved in the separation of church and state, which is why I'm pro-choice, which most Republicans are not. But those are what I think, those are the values that I think, strong national defense, those are the values that I think Republicans have historically supported and still should.
And you talked about John Renninger. Are there any other people who kind of either helped shape you or who you would see as influences or mentors or people you admired?
Yeah. So in terms of mentor, Ed Howard was a state senator, and I met him in 1976 during the campaign, and then he supported me when I ran for the state house. And he had an airplane, so we would fly back and forth to Harrisburg for sessions. And so, and one of the things he's said to me that stuck really importantly throughout my career was, with regard to my relationship with the leadership of the parties, just remember they need you more than you need them. So, they can threaten you. If you don't vote with us, we're going to take away your committee seat and so forth. But that was an important lesson for me. In terms of people I admire right now, Senator Chris Coons from Delaware, I think is one of the finest public servants I've ever known. He's a straight six-shooter. He's not an extremist. He's a moderate, and he's a man of faith. And I think that all shows in how he conducts himself.
So, Jim, if somebody gave you a magic wand and you can have a little dinner party with 3 people, they could be alive or dead,
Hey,
any 3 people, who would you invite to your dinner party?
that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Well, actually, Barack Obama comes to mind.
Yeah.
I didn't vote for him either time, but I admire him. And in fact, I will say that even though I didn't vote for him, when he won, I wept because I was proud of my country that that a black man could be elected president, and he's a brilliant guy, and I think he's a good man. Didn't always agree with his policies, of course, but when you see what we have as a president now, the contrast is extraordinary. I think we might include Albert Einstein in the conversation to try to understand cosmology and how the universe works at that level, and I guess some sort of maybe Sartre. Existentialist, French author. I read his big book, Being in Nothingness, when I was in high school, and that'd be an interesting threesome, I guess.
That would be interesting. Well, if you end up doing it, somehow magically film it. And what about, like, in terms of impact? what kind of, I don't know, media has made an impact, whether it's books or I know you talked about reading The Anxious Generation right now. Is there a book
Hmm.
that, and then you just talked about Sartre with the Nothingness book.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's my
Yeah,
recollection of the, okay. And what books or media have you consumed that you think, have helped to shape you or make an impact on you?
hmm. Well, this will be sound odd, but I read a book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, by a Zen master named Suzuki. It's a small book, but it talks about um, Zen Buddhism, and what I like about it is the whole idea of awareness and meditating in a way that stops all the busy noise, the crazy monkeys in your brain jumping back and forth and thinking about this and that, and that enables you to be awake and thoughtful and conscious, and also what it says about non-attachment, not grasping and holding things. And non-attachment doesn't mean that you don't care about outcomes. I'm horrifically attached to my family, and I care desperately about them. But knowing even within family relations when to let things go,
Yeah.
so it's a peaceful way of being and a peaceful way of thinking, and that's had a lot of impact on me. Um, uh, I would say that the other book I just recently read, which isn't so much about how it's influenced me, but just of interest. I just read a book called "This Is Your Mind" on music, and I have always been intrigued by how it is that the relationship between how the brain is structured and how it responds to music.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating subject because you can take a difference between a major chord and a minor chord is a whole different emotional response, a happy versus sort of a melancholy response. And it's just a half step down on a scale that makes that happen. And the other thing that's really amazing, if you think about how many songs we can hear the first few notes of, and we remember the song. We could hum the whole song. We could remember many of the lyrics. And, there are only probably 100,000 of those in our brains, and they're just sitting there along with everything else ready to be retrieved. And it's in every society, every culture has had music and rhythm and dancing. So it's all very fascinating to me.
Yeah. I'm struck by your curiosity in so many arenas. And it just popped into my head wondering, you've got so many things that you're interested in. And I wonder, do you ever miss? Do you ever miss that life that you had when when you held office?
Um, Initially, when I left Congress, I did. I was still in DC, and I would come home and turn on C-SPAN or something and watch the debates. And I'm like, I should be down there. I should be there. And my daughter, who was a page in the House, was very disappointed when I left Congress, and she thought I was leaving my responsibility. But I felt that 24 years in public service was enough. Um, but the way things, but then when I was there, I worked across the aisle. We had it was the bitterness. There was certainly partisanship and all of that, but the bitterness, the tribalism, was different. And if you look at there's I sometimes teach a class about this. If you map out with red dots the Republican votes in the state house and the U.S. House, and blue the Democrats and red the Republicans. And you chart how often people voted across the aisle. It used to be a great overlap, and it just went to complete, almost perfect, zero overlap. And so there's no middle ground to be found, very little middle ground to be found now. And so I wouldn't enjoy being there now. I don't know whether could survive being there now. And the other thing is, I never took any political action committee money when I was in Congress, And there's so much money way too much money in politics now, and I don't know if I could have afforded to continue to run elections unless I changed that position.
Yeah. So what lights you up today? What is lighting you up now? What is your fuel in this moment?
Well, again, for those Republicans who may be listening to this, who consider me a traitor again, but right now I want to help the Democrats flip the House. And it's not because I believe in everything that they believe in, but I think that the situation we face right now is horrific. And I think that the Democrats need to take the House back so that they can create some kind of a balance in the Congress and in the federal government, and also because there's a lot that needs to be investigated, and the way that Donald Trump is selling pardons for people buying his coins is the way that there's so much corruption and grifting going on in Washington right now, so much incompetence. The ridiculousness of the cabinet appointees like RFK and Hegseth, and things like climate change, which I've said is so important to me. We don't have the time to keep losing ground on climate change. So that's my burning desire right now is to. I'm still greatly involved in politics from the outside, and I'm going to help Josh Shapiro get reelected because I think he'd make a great presidential candidate.
You know, Jim, you just made me recall something when you talked about climate change, and it makes sense for somebody who had such a love of nature. But you mentioned in a prior conversation that, conservation of resources is kind of a conservative value.
Um, I talked about climate change being dire. There's no the science is settled on that. No matter what area of science you're in, whether you're studying insects or birds or trees or oceans or atmosphere, it's clear what's happening, and it is threatening the inhabitability of this planet, and mass extinctions of wildlife, which impinges right on us. And so I think that it's crazy to call yourself a conservative and not think about conservation and conserving the planet on which we live. Um, some people will quote the Bible and talk about that man has dominion over the world, and they interpret that to mean like we can do whatever we want with the planet, and God's not going to let anything happen to it. Well, that's ridiculous. Dominion means to take care of it, to cherish it and protect it. So in a number of ways, I think that we're really losing ground, and Trump's attitude is so ignorant. He's opposed to windmills. He doesn't understand how they work. He's opposed to sustainable energies of all kinds, and he wants to drill, baby, drill, and that's just very backward thinking.
So, your legacy, when people think about you, your life, your service, what matters to you? What would you like that legacy to be?
I would like, and not so much for myself. I won't be around to see my legacy, but my children will, and my grandchildren will be, and I hope that they'll be able to say, our grandfather was ethical, that he got into the arena, which is, if you've ever read the lines, I think Teddy Roosevelt talked about the man in the arena, he falls and but he gets up and so forth. And to be in the arena and to come out with your integrity intact is challenging. And I would hope that they would think that. I hope that they would think I'm a good father and a good husband and a good person. That's about all. A half-decent photographer.
Yeah, I mean, actually, maybe you could send a couple of photographs and we could include that. That would be really exciting.
I will.
Hey, do you have a favorite bird?
I get that question all the time.
We
I
think in superlatives, Jim. So,
what's that?
like we think in superlatives. Like what's
Yeah,
the
I
best? What's
know.
the best bird?
But yeah, but I photographed hummingbirds all over the place, and they're fabulous. And just photographing, king penguins, which entirely other end of the spectrum in terms of size, and ostriches in Africa, and toucans, and all kinds of wonderful birds. Um, they birds are amazing. They fly, they make nests, they dance, they sing. Some of them live in vast colonies. I just was in the Falkland Islands with these beautiful imperial cormorants in a colony of thousands and thousands and thousands of them. And then you see little birds like rock hoppers, these little penguins that they'll go and they'll hop around and pick up a little stone and bring it back to their mate in the nest. And so there's just so many interesting behaviors. And then the challenge is finding them and not scaring them away while you're trying to get a picture of them, and then getting all your settings on your camera just right, and trying to catch them flying in air and keep it focused. So it's a really wonderful thing to do. I love it, and when I'm out in the wilderness doing those kinds of things, I'm not worrying about the state of the world so much, or
Yeah,
my family so much. I'm just focusing on that. It's a nice way. It's nice recreation.
it's beautiful. Well, thank you so much.
Oh,
Thank
my
you not
pleasure.
only for coming on the podcast, but thank you for being a leader and someone that people can look to when feeling less than brave, or even helpless actually in this environment. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No, we're
appreciate
not
that.
we're not helpless. We all can have an impact if it's nothing other than voting and talking and staying informed. And it's critical that we do, because we are really teetering on our continuation of our leadership in the world. If the United States doesn't lead the world, there's nobody who's going to fill that. No other country can fill that vacuum, except
Yeah,
China and other totalitarian states. And we're not helpless. We have to fight. And I think we'll come out of this okay in a few years.
yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. Thank you for being a valued part of the Soulful community. Thank you to William Aronson for writing, recording, and producing the Soulful Connections theme song. And finally, always know you're not alone. We are connected. We're all in this thing together, and you and your story are important. Let's just keep on connecting.